Test, 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 test.
Test, test. Going to ask my school board colleagues to join me up here at the stage so that we can prepare to start our hearing this evening. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Kansas City Public Schools 2019 tax levy public hearing. We are returning from a brief recess, and then we will now begin with our hearing. No, I talked to Ms. Linda. The chair recognizes Superintendent Mark Bedell to begin this hearing this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is at this time that the administration will provide a tax rate hearing and review in adherence to Board Policy DC-2, which is a requirement of state statute. So at this time, we will bring up our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Linda Quinley, to conduct the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Manzer, Dr. Bedell, and Board, and our public. We are here tonight under the Missouri statute that says each Board of Education must adopt a tax rate annually. For charter counties, such as Jackson County, we have to have ours adopted by October 1st, and so thus the reason that we're here tonight, holding the hearing that's required in order to set the rate and move to the 2019 tax revenues. A little of information on Kansas City Public Schools and the tax rate setting process before you hear from your public. The tax rate can be set into 4 different funds. 1, 2, and 4 are commonly referred to as the operating fund across districts across Missouri. Fund 3, debt service, you'll see that special note. Kansas City Public Schools does not have an authorized general obligation bond, which is what would require a levy in this fund, so we do not have anything in Fund 3. There are 5 major components you can see when calculating the tax rate typically, assessed valuation and the change in that being one of the most important ones. Hancock Amendment restrictions when they apply, and we'll talk about that. Proposition C, which is a sharing of sales tax revenues. And for Kansas City Public Schools and the charters inside our boundaries, Article 10, Section 11G that we'll look at a little closer. And then, as mentioned, your debt balances and the necessary levy to repay debt if you have those. So the important components of assessed valuation, really important to note right off the bat that new construction and improvement doesn't ever play into the calculation because it wasn't on the books last year to be reassessed. So new construction, that money is ours regardless of what happens in the reassessment process. Reassessment occurs every other year. As you know, this year is a reassessment year. Tax increment financing properties in Kansas City do play on the total revenues of the district when it comes to local property taxes, and in calculations outside of Kansas City Public Schools actually play into the rate calculation. For 2019, the TIF values on the books as we can find them to be from the authorities, the agencies right now, is almost $421 million of properties untaxed or taxed at a lower reduced rate. The Hancock Amendment says that every time you're setting your tax rate, you get to consider the lesser of 3 measures, that being the actual increase in assessed valuation, consumer price index, or a statutory maximum of 5%. That's for districts who use the Hancock Amendment. Since Kansas City Public Schools is the only district in the state of Missouri not under Hancock, that rule does not apply to us, and we'll look at what that has meant historically and what it means now for Kansas City. So Article 10 of the Missouri Constitution, we're sharing this exact language because it's such a critical component of this. We want to make sure, Board, we know you've understood it because you've studied it with us over the last several months, but important for our public to understand that the Kansas City Public Schools board is different than every other in the establishment of a levy, in that pursuant to the federal court order of 1995, the board may establish the operating levy at a rate that is lower than the court-ordered rate of 1995, which was $4.96. So this board establishes the rate each year based solely on this court order. This is a little bit of the historical information that we wanted to share that kind of tells the story about the difference between the Hancock Amendment for most taxing jurisdictions and Kansas City Public Schools. What you have in the blue shaded part of this graph is the assessed valuation of properties in our taxing jurisdiction boundaries. And that first year is 2007. You see it at its peak there compared to where we are today. And the reason that this graph is so important is that, as we all know, that in 2008, the national economy, particularly real estate, began to see a lot of concern and worries, and property values began to decline. And you see that decline for 2 years running, and then a small decline, and then a fourth decline, before things started ticking back up, really in 2015. So there was about 7 years there where we were on a constant decrease in assessed valuation. The green line that you see is then the revenues that the Kansas City Public School Systems collected related to property taxes. And you see that it did exactly what property values did. It really mirrors it, and you see that steep and immediate decline from 2007 to 2008, from 2008 to 2009, and then the slow increase. The red line across the middle basically shows you that in 2017, we got back to the same assessed valuation levels in Kansas City as we had in 2007. The same is true with revenues. Those two came back together then. And the reason that this slide is important and shows how we're different than districts who live under the Hancock Amendment is that in 2008 and 2009 and those few years thereafter, when across the state we were seeing decreases in property values, what the Hancock Amendment was doing was helping keep the boat even. So as assessed valuations were going down in other taxing jurisdictions, the tax rate was going up to keep the revenues flat, like that red line that you see there. But Kansas City Public Schools, because of Article 10, could not take the rate back up as the assessed valuation was declining. So our line went down where other schools' revenues would have stayed similar to that red line that you see there. It's really the intent of Hancock, but since we are not subject to it, we didn't experience that. You'll see in the white void below the red line, cumulatively over these last 10, 11, 12 years, because of that decrease and that continued decrease and the slow recovery, KCPS has operated on $147 million less than we would have if the revenue had stayed flat. Really important when I say KCPS that I remember and that you help me remember, we're talking about us plus charter schools, because charter schools receive their fair share of that local revenue based on their student counts, just like we do. So what's the information on this year and the calculation? The final assessed valuation as we received it last year was just under $3.2 million, almost equal to the $3.2 million we had in 2007. The final, and we use that term lightly, value that we received as of September 1st from the assessor's office was just over $4 billion. And that difference is $824 million, or 25.96%. Really important for us to note that is a large number. It's a large increase, certainly compared to historic trend. But we know that because of the situation behind the assessments and concern and question about both the process and some of the values provided to some of our property owners, that's our high point. We will not hit that $4 billion point because appeals continue to happen. The Board of Equalization is really just now, as of a week, 10 days ago, started getting really active in hearing those appeals. And we certainly know the values won't decrease or increase, but they will in fact decrease from this high water mark of $4 billion. We can't tell you, Board of Education, what that number is going to be. No one's going to know until that process is complete, which at this point looks like we'll be lucky to get it completed this calendar year. Important to know, of that $4 billion, 85 million of it is in fact new construction. And you'll remember we just talked about that new construction comes off. It's not an increase because it wasn't on the books last year to be reassessed and be part of the increase. So we back that off. to get to a $739 million increase, or 23.27% on average for commercial, agriculture, and residential properties on the books a year ago during the assessment process. A lot of numbers on this slide. I certainly won't read them all to you, but it gives you a historic lens of the change in assessed valuation by type of property. Residential property is assessed at 19% of market, where commercial is assessed at 32% of market. So you've got a little information there behind that. And if you just go across that line that says total real estate, you can see the increase, the $846 million we just looked at in that next to last column that says change. But you see in the far right column, I think one of the most important components of this slide, we have a high residential increase and an average of 24.36. But our commercial increase is by far the greater amount and has a more significant impact on the net change in assessed valuation. We're looking at a decrease in personal property, which comes into play as well, and that's how we get to that 25.96% change. We want to make sure we always talk about what does this mean, particularly to our homeowners. And so this slide gives us a little bit of information relating to someone who owned a home that's the market value. The first column shows you the market value was $100,000 last year. And that home, with an increase of the average 24.36% this year, the market value would have gone from 100% to $100,000 to $124,000 to get that 24% increase. We assess that at 19%. So when you drop down to the very bottom line, what that means is this same property a year ago would have paid $942 in property taxes. This year would pay $1,172, or an increase of $230 for a $100,000 home within our boundaries. The operating tax levies, as you see here, that we want to show with you the revenue related to this. You have 2 years of historical and 1920 based on some assumptions that number one, that $4 billion is the starting point now, but we've assumed that gets reduced and that does not become our actual billable. So we're assuming a 3.75% unbillable off of the $4 billion. That takes $9 million out of the revenues that we would receive. Then, as a way to pay for the services rendered for assessing and collecting, we have fees to the county that total just under $3 million to get to a net revenue for this year of $167 million, roughly a $23 million increase. Really, again, I may wear this out, but important to note, this revenue doesn't all stay here. We do share this with our charters. There's a little bit of a delay in how that share happens, and that's just about logistics and process. But nearly 1/2 of this revenue ends up with our charter schools, and the increase is the same. Important to note, too, that while we would have this money this year, next year, in 2 years, we would have to decrease our budget in order to share that money with the charter schools. And you can see, if you did the math between the top line and the bottom line, we get to, after fees, after delinquencies, and after appeals and changes downward in values, roughly 84.18% of what is actually billable today being billed and collected and delivered to the school district. So here are operating tax levy comparisons for the districts around us. This excludes debt service. So really this is those funds that I talked about that make up the operating levy. These are yet uncertified, so they could change, but this is what we believe, based on conversations we're having with our peer districts, are going to happen. And you see that Kansas City is going to sit in third position at 4.9599 should the rate stay the same. But as you look at the next four, we're really all in there together. So basically Kansas City sits right in the middle, Kansas City Public, of the operating levies assessed across our county. This slide shows you then what the total tax levy is that taxpayers pay in each of these, because every one of these districts has that debt service levy to add to their operating levy that we do not. And you notice that we come from sitting in the third position to sitting in the bottom position. We continue to remain at the bottom at 4.955 compared to a high of 6.613. So what does that mean? This gives you a look at a $100,000 home, again, market value of a $100,000 home in a variety of school districts in our area. And if you just go to the bottom line, you see the amount of property tax that each of these property owners would pay depending upon which school district they sit in. So Center at the highest, $1,256 for a $100,000 home, and Kansas City at the lowest at $942 for a $100,000 home. So we are not insensitive to or happy with the process that has occurred during reassessment entirely. We believe and understand and know there have been some errors. And so with that, while we hope the BOE process is a good one and that it results in what it's supposed to, at your request, we've provided you some information related to what you could do considering a possible reduction of our rate and what that means in the way of revenues. So under Article 10, you can reduce below the 4.9599, but you just can't go back above it. So back in 2007, 2008, 2009, the board didn't have the option to raise the rate when property values and revenues were decreasing. You do have the option to lower the rate when property values and revenues are increasing. So you can see what 3 cents, 5 cents, 8 cents, and 10 cents, and what that would change our levy to. And the bottom line there, what it would mean in the way of revenues that would have been unexpected but could be made available to us that we would give up on these rollbacks. Those would be revenues that would go back to the property owners. Again, we're looking at somewhere in the 84 to 82.5% net collection rate compared to a gross billable, which is what we work off of when we talk to you about the rates. We can make no promises what that's going to look like because we don't control the BOE process. We don't know who will and won't pay. And so these are our best estimates based on the information that we have available. So when you walk through the process, the calculation provides us with your allowable rate at 4.9599. Typically, Kansas City Public Schools, we place all of that tax rate into the incidental fund, which is the fund that covers non-instructional staff mostly. And then we move the needed resources into the teacher's fund or the special fund to cover the cost of instruction for the district. We set nothing aside in capital projects fund for a couple of reasons. If we do that, it becomes unavailable to an equal share with charters as is intended. It also just simply reduces what we have for operating. And as we've said a few times, we do not have a debt service levy because we don't have any general obligation bond debt. So that is our information for you as you prepare to hear from your public tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Quinley and Superintendent Mark Bedell. We will move into the public comment portion of this meeting. I have just a couple of statements to make as we begin this next piece. The Kansas City School Board welcomes everyone here tonight to share your thoughts on the property tax assessment process and its impact on your household and among your neighbors. The Kansas City Public Schools stepped up, along with nearly a dozen other taxing jurisdictions in Jackson County, including Kansas City's charter schools, to provide additional necessary support to the Jackson County government to help ensure a complete, fair, and transparent assessment process. We recognize that the way in which the assessment process has unfolded has caused fear and concern among many homeowners. We are committed to an accurate and fair process, as we are deeply committed to secure, stable, and healthy neighborhoods. This is where we operate our schools and where many of our students and their families and even KCPS faculty and other kinds of staff in our district live and work. It is to our benefit that neighborhoods remain stable and add to the vibrancy of our city. We regret that the process played out in the manner at which it did. But at this point in the hearing, we are here tonight to gather information and to hear from local residents and property owners. If you would like to speak tonight, we ask that anyone wishing to speak tonight sign in. There is a sign-in sheet over on the table. We will call those individuals to the microphone in the order in which they sign in. Please be aware that you will have 3 minutes to address the board. For individuals who may be participating via the KCPS board meeting live stream, those individuals, if they are not here but want to submit a comment, they can submit a brief statement using our cube, which is literally a cube, and can be sent to the phone number 816-678-7099. Individuals who submit a statement via the cube are asked to provide their name. So at this time, we will begin to call individuals who wish to speak. The first person to come to the microphone is Mr. Richard Hernandez. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez, and once you get settled here, we'll give you 3 minutes to address the board. Thank you.
Board and Chair. I got 4 points I'd like to make for the West Side. First, I'd like to see you roll back the levies so that the revenues are neutral. And if you absolutely have to have an increase, you could comply with the Hancock rule, which limits you to 5% revenue increase. You could do that. And I'd like you to reject the 25% revenue increase. It's based on chaotic, unfair assessments this year, as you all know. Hurt a lot of people, going to hurt a lot of people in the future. We can't have that. And the reassessment this year, as you know, pretty much ethnic cleansing. That's how we see it. In the West Side neighborhood especially, we hit the hardest if you look at the charts. And please don't exploit and compound this horrible situation. You all could be a leader in the community if you wanted to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. The next person who is signed in to speak is Ms. Teresa Perry.
Good evening, leaders.
Welcome.
I just want to ask the question too first before we start. I hear what my one of my people are saying, but I want to know also, how will this affect the Kansas City School District if, maybe the financial advisor could tell me, but will this have effect on you all as well if you go ahead and roll back, or how far can you roll back? Because we got to keep our children in mind too, y'all. Y'all know where I'm going with this. I'm all community, sorry I could be broke, whatever, but let's do our community. So how will this affect you all? I mean, how will it impact our school district, our children and families?
So, Ms. Perry, given that it's a hearing, I urge you to go back and look at the slides, and I'm hoping you got a slide set because you can get a picture of what sorts of revenues that we would not be available to us at different levels.
Okay, and then let me ask this one. When you went by the impact to the homeowner based on new assessed valuations, was that the one based on now with what the Jackson County Courthouse had done?
So, I'm sorry, say that, Linda, what are you saying? Based on the final assessment as of September 1st. And actually, Ms. Perry, we can't, it's not really designed to be a dialogue, but I want to just repeat, it's for the audience, it's based on the assessment as of September 1st, but keep in mind, as the presentation showed, this process is going to continue. So that is not, in fact, likely to be the final.
Okay, and yes, we know that some of my constituents that's getting up, we all been out helping some of the people in the community, you know, with their taxes and all that. And the reason why I asked that, because whereas I know you said one homeowner was $100,000, some of them, it was $100,000 for their house, and they saying it went up just $124,000. No, they went up 200-something thousand. So that's why I'm trying to see how it's a big mess. That's why I wanted to ask, how is it going to affect our babies here learning, as well as how I know it's already affecting some of their parents. I mean, just vacant lots went from $13 to $4,000. I don't do the numbers. That's why I asked that, so I can know. But with me seeing the numbers, working with some of our people in the community, you're right. Because now it could even, the way what we seen, it could come back and affect some of the parents were that I had someone say, I'm just gonna move. I'm gonna move out. You know, but where are you gonna go? It's seriously, because I told people this is across the nation. So I just hope that, you know, I don't know how it's gonna affect us at the school district or whatever, but that whoever gets involved and make sure we make this work for everybody, for the school district, for the community, for everybody. Y'all know me, I don't straddle the fence, can't nobody pay me off, but we just got to make this work for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one additional name, Mr. Luke Norris. Would you go please check on it? You did?
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
I stand before you tonight as the Board Chair of Citizens of the World, Kansas City. Tonight, on behalf of several of my charter peers, including Dean Johnson of Crossroads, John Otto, the Board Chair of Academy Lafayette, David Oliver, the Board Chair of De La Salle, and your former Board peer and my Executive Director, John Heil, I want to underscore today that nearly 50% of all students in the district attend charter schools, many in those schools I just mentioned. Given our collaborative efforts currently underway to create funding equity and the goal we share in educating all children, my aforementioned peers and I encourage you to hold the levy. Decreases, as small as they may be, not only will impact your operations, but will have a ripple effect that impacts all students. These decreases could be further impacted by decreases the county chooses to make in assessed values. We encourage you to hold the levy and not roll back. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, there are no other individuals who signed in to speak to the board, unless there are additional names on the list. Okay. So we have completed our list. At this point, we will conclude this meeting. For your information, just so you are aware, this was our public hearing for us to hear from you and to share information with you as well about the property tax levy and its impact on the Kansas City Public Schools. The Board of Directors will hold its monthly business meeting on Wednesday, September 25th. And the levy setting will be discussed and acted on Wednesday evening. So we welcome you to join us on Wednesday evening. Our business meeting will begin at 6:30 p.m. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.